Yo, SWAC talk. Light on the mic, it's a play. Seawell's the guy taking us state to state. Catch us Wednesday, Sunday, stats on the buffet. From gridiron to the court, we got the say. Football spirals, hoop dreams in the chat. Chopping it up, deep dives on every stat. Texas to Florida, repping border to border. Arkansas to Bama, the vibe getting warmer. SWAC talk, keep the knowledge on deck. Seawell spinning, wisdom gotta show respect. Facts flying higher than a wide receiver's check. From football to hoops, what y'all expect? Yes, roll through, dropping stories untold. Legends from the SWAC, spitting straight gold. Locker room vibe, secrets unfold. CW heavy like a championship hold. The South's got a rhythm, a culture to match. Each stat, each fact, another door latch. SWAC talk connects like a perfect pass catch. From Alabama skies to Florida's grass patch. SWAC talk, keep the energy alive. Wednesday to Sunday, where the legends thrive. Facts and stats sharper than a coach's knife. Balling on the mic, that's how we survive.
What's going on, everybody? How y'all doing? Welcome to today's edition of SWAC Talk, the show we cover the SWAC inside and out. I am your tour guide around the SWAC. Seawell's coming at you, and today we're going to have a little fun, man. We're going to do a little inexact science. There's been a lot of talk about eliminating divisions because there's been years where the West Division has been strong and the East has been weak, and then there's been recent years where the East has been strong, and two of the best teams in the league have been in the East, and the West has been, a hodgepodge. So, a lot of people have been saying, maybe we should find a different way to determine who makes the SWAC championship game. So I decided to have a little fun with this. I always like to put disclaimers on things, and this disclaimer is, this is very inexact science. I drew this up today on the way home from work, so it ain't really fleshed out 100%, and it ain't really scientifically tested. So there's gonna be some holes in it if you decided to investigate it. But this is all for fun, so we just pass the time during the off season. So with that being said, man, don't forget to hit those socials: Facebook is SWAC Talk, Instagram SWAC Talk, Twitter SWAC Talk 76. Also, don't forget to like the video, comment, and share your thoughts on this, man. How would you fix it? How would you do it? And hit that subscribe button, and hit that like button, and hit that notification button. Hit all those buttons and support the SWAC Talk fam, man. And don't forget tomorrow, 200th episode of SWAC Talk. Man, we're going to have a good time. We got a good show lined up for you. So y'all make sure y'all come and check us out for episode number 200. Who knew we would be here after episode 1, which was actually not a bad episode. I went back and watched it again. You could see some of the bones in there that make for the show for what it is now. So y'all make sure y'all go ahead and lock in with us tomorrow, because we're gonna have us a good time on our 200th episode of SWAC Smoke. So without any further ado, because this is not gonna be a long video, let's go ahead and jump into it. So first and foremost, we all know the SWAC is divided in the East and West, 6 teams each. You got Jackson State, Bama State, Alabama A&M, FAMU, Bethune-Cookman, and Valley in the East. You got Southern, Grambling, Alcorn, Texas Southern, Prairie View, and Pine Bluff in the West. Before FAMU and Bethune-Cookman joined, Alcorn was in the East, and it was 5-2 divisions. So, a lot of people feel like one of the biggest moves in college football right now is to eliminate divisions. And so I decided to come up with a couple ideas on how to do the SWAC without divisions per se. And obviously, that we'll keep the divisions in play as well. So there's like 3 different scenarios that you can use. And the first one is the easiest one, and that's to, keep the divisions as they are. And then, you can have 2 options off of that. You can take the top 2 teams, the top team in each division, and put them in the SWAC championship game. Or you could just use the divisions for basically schedule and traveling purposes, and then just take the top 2 teams, period, regardless of division. Take the top 2 teams and put them in a SWAC championship game. So, that's one avenue that you can do. Um, or you can just eliminate divisions and go 1 through 12 and top two make it. FBS, I mean, excuse me, FCS is basically moving to a full time 12 game schedule. So that gives you some options. You can play an 8 game schedule and go with the top two teams in the SWAC, regardless, with no divisions. Or you can move to a 9 game schedule, which is kind of what some of these teams are playing anyway. So you give these teams that extra SWAC game to avoid that dreaded SWAC opponent as a non-conference opponent. Um, I don't have any problem with any of these. I don't have a problem with moving to no divisions and going 1 through 12 and playing a 9 game schedule that still leaves you 3 non-conference games if that's the route you want to go. Or you play 8, which gives you 4 non-conference games, but no SWAC opponents as non-conference opponents. That would be my hard and fast rule. Of course, I know, with Southern and Jackson kind of rolling off the schedule, that was some push from people to keep that game on the schedule, and that's why I said maybe you go to a 9 game schedule and you don't have to have that problem. You can protect rivalries and still have your other games being played. So that's kind of, I think, the way that most people look at it, and that's one of the ways I look at it. But I wanted to have a little fun, and I was actually doing some looking, and I found out that the MAC went to this model starting this past season, and that's going into the pod system. Um, and pods are basically small divisions, but they're not used in terms of standings. They're basically used in terms of travel and just maybe giving teams um, permanent opponents that they could play yearly. So in the MAC they kind of did it geographically, and I tried to do the same here. Of course, with that you're gonna have some teams that you play all the time that you don't play. But I tried to in my scenario I went with an 8 game schedule. You can do this for a 9 game schedule, but I went with an 8 game schedule, and I chose to go with one permanent rivalry opponent for each team, and so that keeps that even if teams aren't necessarily in the same pod, that still allows you to play some of these rivalry games that would cause hell if these games weren't played. Otherwise, I thought about doing a 3 team, a 3 pod 4 team, a three using 3 pods of 4 teams, but I didn't really like that as much. I think four pods of 3 kind of makes it flow a little bit better for me. But you can do a 3 pod system with 4 teams. But for me, these would be my pods, and these can all be rearranged. Pod A would be Alabama State, FAMU, Bethune-Cookman. That's the 2 Florida schools and the team that's probably closest to them. Pod B would be Jackson, Alcorn, and Alabama A&M. Now, I've debated on putting Valley in this pod or not, but I think A&M fits a little bit better with this pod. Um, they're still kind of in that area, so they would occupy that northern portion of the pod, and then pod C would be Valley, Pine Bluff, and Grambling. And this is kind of like the oddest one because Grambling could be in pod B, or with some moving around, it could be in pod D. I think Pine Bluff and Valley are kind of out of the way a little bit, and Grambling kind of fits there because they are, kind of a northern school in the conference. And again, these pods don't have anything that these pods are not like divisions. So just because these 2 teams are in your pod, yes, you'll play them, but it doesn't really it doesn't really hurt you because hey, if you're in a pod like this, hey, that's probably 2 free wins. So why would you look down on it? And then pod D would be Southern, Tech Southern, and Prairie View, which is basically the I-10 corridor. I guess you could put it that way. For me, I went with, like I said, one permanent opponent, and for Bama State, obviously that'd be Alabama and them because you got to keep the Mad City Classic. Of course, you can avoid that by putting them in a pod together, but I chose to not do that, and that game will still be protected and played. I put Jackson State for FAMU. Um, and because because of certain games had to be protected, I think that game would um, be a good every year opponent. Um, Bethune-Cookman, when I put Prairie View, that's kind of you can juggle that one way or the other. But those are my Pod A permanent opponents. Pod B, obviously Jack State with FAMU. Alcorn I put with Valley. That is a in-state rivalry, so you keep that game going. And then Alabama and them, Bama State, Mad City Classic. Pod C, you got Valley and Alcorn, of course. Pine Bluff and Texas Southern, not really a rivalry, but they played at the end of the season a couple years, and they've had some interesting games. So for me, that fits. Of course, Bayou Classic, Grambling and Southern, since they're not in the same pod, that game would be protected over any other rivalry that either one of these teams have. So it's kind of you get you kind of get the games that you would have gotten if these teams were in the same pod, but they're not. So you still get those games, and then you kind of had those manufactured games, where you just had to put somebody with somebody, um, and so you got a mixed match, and you could do it another way, where you keep the teams who have a permanent opponent, you keep them, and everybody else just rotates another school in that spot. Um, Depending on whether they have a protected team or not. I just chose to go with one for everybody. I think it makes it a little bit easier. So that gives you a scheduling option of two pod opponents, a permanent opponent, which makes three games, and then you will rotate five teams out of the other three pods, um, and then that will give you 8 games. Or you could go with um, you could throw it, you could play a 9 game schedule and rotate six opponents. The goal is to kind of play everybody at least once every 3 years, because I kind of thought about this because when I was doing my season series, I saw you had games like, Bama A&M and Prairie View hadn't played since like 2016. Texas Southern and Valley who hadn't, I think, played since like 2019. So, even with a spring game in there and a non-conference matchup, Southern and Bama State hadn't really played a fall regular season conference game since 2016. So, that's a long time to go without playing some teams in your conference that you used to play all the time. You look at, even though they don't play very often, but Southern and Valley, they don't really play that often. So you kind of can mix it up like that and rotate teams on your schedule and off your schedule every 3 years. That kind of keeps it fresh, and that kind of keeps you from going long stretches without playing teams, and obviously it would lock you into one protected game. Or if a team has multiple, you could get them two protected opponents, and substitute that other protected opponent for one of those non-protected opponents if that's the route you chose to go. So if you're a Southern, you probably could still keep Grambling and Jackson State, and not have to worry about it, or you just have that team fall off because in a couple of years they'll slide back on anyway. So I don't think it's necessarily a big issue for some of these games, to kind of slide off for a year, um, and slide back on. But that gives you an opportunity to play everybody, um, and then you still take the top two teams in the conference by record. So regardless if two teams in Pod A had the best records in the league, maybe one of them was 8-0, another one was 7-1. They was both go to the SWAC championship game. So that cuts out that situation where we would have where Jackson State was 8-0, FAMU was 7-1, and FAMU had to sit at home while a 6-2 or 5-3 West Division team had to go play in the championship game. So it cuts that out, and the pods are just strictly for travel. I guess you say grouping for travel and scheduling, so it doesn't have any impact on standings per se. Like that's the end all be all, and that makes for a better thing for me. It makes it more interesting. And to me, the whole goal is to play um, more teams more often. And so, having that happen, with a 10-team conference and you had 8 games, you kind of got to really, yeah, 9 games. So you really played everybody, all the time. So there was no drop off. You had everybody on your schedule all the time. And even when you went to A game, you only had one team that you didn't play, but they would come on your schedule every so often. So it was a little bit more economical. With 12, it's still not that bad. And that's why I think, a pod system works for this because it gives you two guaranteed games, or three if you kind of protect an opponent. And other teams are going to rotate every couple of years. So you still get that, you still get to see everybody home and away over a 3 year or 4 year period of time, depending on how you want to do it. Um, and that's why I like this probably better than even a non-divisional aspect, because I think it gives you a little bit more. It keeps some teams together, and it can kind of maybe even strengthen a rivalry just because these two teams, these are the two teams that you're gonna play all the time, and if they're not really necessarily full rivals, maybe they can become that because you're playing them more often. Um, and basically, that's the way I look at it. And like I said, this is a very inexact thing. Basically, drew it up on the way home from work, so didn't really think it fully out. But I wanted to give y'all a little show, a little something to think about. I think I did a show like this last year. I don't know how in depth I went into it, but I kind of like I said once I saw the Mac example, I was like, okay, this works. You don't necessarily have to lose any games. You may have a game or two here or there that drops off, but it's not going to be long enough that it makes a big enough difference. And for me, like I said, with the SWAC going, with the FCS going to a 12 game schedule full time, that makes it still where you can play four non-conference games, like you play 9 games, three non-conference games. And again, I do not want any SWAC opponents and non-conference opponents. I think any series other than like the main in-state ones will survive not being played like a year or so. You just have to make sure that those teams kind of cycle. Maybe that's the team that you play twice in the first 3 years. If they fall off one, then they come back on. Maybe they only take a 1 year off. Or you go to two opponents for some teams, but that makes an imbalance. So because after a certain point, you get to just putting teams with teams, and that's not necessarily a good way to go about it. But that's basically it, man. Like I said, I just wanted to come through and share this with you. Like I said, I'm sure other people have done this, and I think I've done it before. But I wanted to kind of flesh it out a little bit better with an example from the MAC, and you still get to have your top two teams go to state championship game, whether they're in the same part or they're not. So it doesn't really affect anything, and it still makes for a good season. So with that being said, man, I'm your tour guide around the SWAC. See well signing out, and I will catch y'all on the rebound. Make sure y'all come through tomorrow for the 200 episode of SWAC Smoke is going down. Y'all make sure y'all come in and lock in with us and let's have us a good time. So with that being said, I'm out. I'll catch y'all on the rebound. Peace.